Alrighty then. I don't know why it keeps doing this. I'm trying to have it to where it's not flipping back and forth. Hold on a second. All right, let me get this out of the background before it starts making an echo here. Yeah. All right, shalom, everyone. I'm Brother Doug. We're live right now. We are the Wakened by Yahuwah Assembly, Yahuwah Almighty, and Yahushua Messiah. Tonight, we are doing a continuation of Paul's letters. Just bear with me for a second. I'm trying to find where Hebrews here is in my ISR here. Okay, 1167. Okay. Oh, they put Hebrews like all the way at the back here.
Yeah, it's right after 2 Timothy.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day where, in my opinion, Paul's letters should be the first letters of the New Testament if we're talking about chronologically when the books were written down physically. So
yeah,
as far as that's concerned. But anyway. So here we go. Chapter 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Shalem or Salem, priest of the Most High Eluah, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the king and brute him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all. His name being translated indeed first, King of Righteousness. So that's an important part to highlight there. King of Righteousness, which again goes back to Yahusha. Yahuwah is our righteousness. We might want to look that up, Mom, after this chapter's read.
Sure.
In the book of, I think, Jeremiah it is.
Yeah.
The stem of Jesse and all that. Okay, and then also King of Shalem. So again, that's another important thing to highlight. King of Salem, Jerusalem. Okay, that is King of Peace. Prince of Peace. Okay, so there's tons of hints here who Melchizedek is here, and obviously, if you look at how Paul is describing him, it's very clear who he's saying is Melchizedek. Without father, without mother. Now, open book test, guys. Who's the one person in Scripture that is without a father and mother? Yahusha, right? Because he's the creator, so he's without a father and a mother. And I know a lot of people will say, well, Yahuwah is his father. Yes, in a sense, he's his father, but not in the way humans look at fathers and mothers. He wasn't begotten in a genetic, physical way that humans are begotten. So in essence, you can't really consider that valid, saying that, well, that contradicts that because Yahuwah is his father. If you look actually throughout the scriptures, Yahusha is his own father. He is the father. So essentially he is his. So if you actually look at that aspect of it, it's not the same thing what Paul's talking about. Paul's talking about someone that would not have a actual legitimate, in a mortal sense, father or mother. Like as humans have fathers and mothers. So without genealogy, Yahusha has no start, so he has no genealogy, having neither beginning or days nor end. A lot of people don't like this because this is why a lot of people don't want to accept him as Melchizedek, even in this walk, is because then you have to accept that he's the creator, because only one person has no beginning and ending. The Alpha and Omega, right? The Aleph and Tav. There's only one Aleph and Tav. So then you have to accept he's the father.
But Brother Doug, who was the one that came up with the idea that Shem could be? Was that Nimrod?
Rabbis? It was rabbis. The Talmud, the rabbis that wrote the Talmud, or I should say, who revised the Babylonian Talmud at some point, put it in there that Shem was Melchizedek to disqualify the book of Hebrews. So the type of rabbis like the Masoretes and all of them, they would want to promote that Shem is Melchizedek because then it disqualifies Yahusha. Their whole legend is that supposedly Melchizedek was a earthly, not heavenly priesthood that was passed down from Adam, which there's no proof by that, by the way. There is no canonical inspired proof for that. That is mere legend, Judean fables at that point. But some people believe in that. A lot of the Jewish people believe in that. You talk to a Jewish person that's in Judaism, they'll try to quote their Haggadahs and their their Mishnahs and their midrashes, and they'll say, well, see, no, well, he can't be Melchizedek because Shem is. Missing the whole point of what Paul is saying here is that any regular mortal man can't be Melchizedek because Shem has beginning and ending.
But why
Shem
did
has
they choose? Why do you believe they chose Shem out of all the people in the Bible? Why did they
because
choose
um
him?
because especially when the Masoretes were compiling the Masoretic text, they changed the dates in Genesis so that I think they chose Shem because he was the most likely candidate to fit that in there, to where you had a gap in between whatever priesthood Adam had and what the Levites would have. You had a gap in Genesis, right? So you had a gap of priesthood. So they could try to make the legend that Shem, well, he met Melchizedek, he knew Abraham, and because they already had all these traditions, like Abraham learned from Shem and Noah, supposedly that Noah and Shem didn't die yet when Abraham was growing up. There's already these Haggadah or Agada or whatever you call it traditions, oral traditions of this. So I think, sis, the reason would be that he was the most likely candidate that they could try to squeeze that into the Genesis 10 and 11 genealogies and be like, well, see, Shem is like this Superman. He lived to like 700 years after the flood, and somehow he didn't die yet. In Genesis 11, I'll just show you what I'm talking about here. If you look at, I'll show you how the Masoretes try to pull this. If you actually look at like any Bible app you have, and if you have different versions of the Torah here, I'll show you how the Masoretic differs from both the Samaritan Torah and the Septuagint on this, which are both ancient versions of the Torah that actually predate the Masoretic. Let me see here. And these are the only two versions still to this day that have, and Shem died in Genesis 11. So it's very, very clear to make it, because they're trying to make it like he didn't die yet. And then if he didn't die yet, he would essentially be able to meet Abraham and essentially be the Melchizedek in Genesis 14 that meets Abraham. So I think the reason they chose Shem is he was the most likely candidate that they could have fit that false narrative. They couldn't have anyone else because Noah would have died way before meeting Abraham. They it seemed like that was the easiest way they could do it, was to change the genealogies, drop the ages in the patriarchs so that Shem now lives to be like 600 something 700 years old about, and he meets Abraham. But as you can see here in the LXX, it says Shem lived and he began Arphaxad 500 years. He died at 500 years old, and he begot sons and daughters and died. That's how the Septuagint reads it. You go to the Samaritan Pentateuch, Samaritan Torah in English. Shem lived after he begot Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters, and these were all the days of Shem. And see, this, even the Samaritan Pentateuch has a little bit of rabbinicalness at the end. It says Shem was 600 years and he is dying. So there's still, even the Samaritan Pentateuch, even though it agrees more with the Septuagint, you can already see the rabbinicalness starting to start. Like, he didn't live to be 600. So that already they're trying to like make him live another 100 years, because unless I'm misreading that, and he was 600 in the Septuagint, says here, okay, Shem was 100 years old. Okay, yeah, he was 600. Okay, I read it wrong. So verse 10 says he was 100 when he begot Arphaxad. So he lived another 500 years. Okay, so he did die at 600. Okay, so the Septuagint and the Samaritan are almost exactly identical. except with a little difference in wording. Now, the Masoretic leaves out dying or died. It just says he lived after he begot. Our pact said 500 years he begat sons and daughters, period. There's no mention of him dying. So the reason why they would want Shem to be Melchizedek is because he's the only person realistically that you could make live to the time period where Abraham meets Melchizedek, because all the other patriarchs are dead at this point. He's like the last guy. He's like, you even have Noah dead at that point in Genesis 11. So you really, by them changing Shem's lineage, or not his lineage, but his age, or trying to make it look like he didn't die at 600, it makes it look like he could live another 50 to 100 years. Hence, he would meet Abraham. See what I'm saying? So that's in their own traditions. Like, I'm not making this stuff up. It's in the Talmud. It's in their own traditions, and the Jewish people today go by their traditions of this, and they will not accept Messiah being Melchizedek because of these traditions. They believe that Melchizedek's supposed to be a human priest and all that. The biggest problem is, I'll tell you right now, if Shem is Melchizedek, you still have a problem, because the prophecy of Melchizedek was not given at the time of Shem. So you still have Yahuwah talking to David, right? And he's saying to David in a prophetic messianic foreshadowing, I have begotten you today. Yahuwah did not begot Shem. You still have an issue with that. Those that want to believe that, you still have an issue. You have Psalms contradicting Genesis then, if that's the case. If you want to believe that Shem was the one that met Abraham with bread and wine, then you have an issue, because Psalms later on, Yahuwah himself is saying to Daud that, speaking to him, foreshadowing Messiah being the one that he would actually make Melchizedek in, I believe, the book of Psalms. Was it 110, Mom?
I think so.
You are Melchizedek, priest forever. Obviously, David never became a Melchizedek priest. So Yahuwah is speaking through Yahusha. He's speaking to Daud prophetically, actually referring to Yahusha. That's the reality of Psalms 110. So that there's no way to rationalize Shem. Like, you literally have to take rabbinical tradition over the whole Bible to get that Shem's Melchizedek. That's the only way. Other than that, sis, I don't know why they specifically chose Shem, other than he was the most likely realistic candidate from Genesis 10 to 11. They couldn't pick anyone else. Most of the patriarchs already died at that point. So they had to pick whoever would have been close to the time period of Genesis 14 or whatever. And I guess they thought that, Shem, they could make Shem Melchizedek if they make it look like he didn't die yet. So, but I mean, this is proven in the Talmud. This is proven that the Masoretic version takes out he died or he was dying. And the two most ancient accounts of the Tanakh say that he died in Genesis 11. So this is showing that was purposely changed at some point in time. That was the phrase "he died" was purposely taken out. So, but as we can see here, you're going to see how, if those that want to hold on to the Shem thing, you have to reject the book of Hebrews, you have to reject Paul, if that's the case. Because as you see here, Paul, so far, what has he said, Mom? Melchizedek is without beginning and end, without mother and father. Both of those are pointing to Yahusha. And I know a lot of people say, well, wasn't Mary his mother? She was the mother of the body of flesh he took on. She wasn't his actual mother. She was the mother of that embryo that was inside of her. That's what she was the mother of. Yahusha is a pre-existent being that took on human flesh, that took on a vessel. What that baby was a vessel. Yahusha is the creator in human flesh, meaning the creator became his spirit, the set apart spirit, the righteous set apart spirit, went into the body of that baby. And that's what Yahusha is. He literally walked among us in human flesh. Not that he literally had a human origin like us. He didn't. So I think a lot of people get confused about that. All right, so moving on. No. All right, let me just get this notification out of the way here. Okay. But having been made like the son of Elua, remains a priest for all time. I don't like how that's worded in the Greek. Hold on a second. This is where it gets tricky.
Mhm.
This is where I can see the scribes
Yeah.
trying to make it look like he's not Yahusha by saying like. Okay, this is where it gets tricky. Okay, now the Aramaic says, without father or mother being written in the genealogies, neither having beginning of days or end of life, but in the likeness or image of the son of Elua, his priesthood remains for eternity. Now, when you look at the word image, it actually means character. It can mean representing that exact being. So, meaning that he is the son of Elua. I just want to make that clear. The Aramaic shows that it's the same person. The Greek is saying that he was like. See, that's where it gets tricky. Because just for a little history lesson here, guys, what happened with the Greek New Testaments, a lot of them, what happened was eventually you had Gnostics making Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, copies of the New Testament, and they started watering it down. They started changing verses to take away the what do they call the supreme being of Yahusha? Because Colossians 2:9 says what, Mom? It says he is the fullness of the supreme being dwells in him bodily, meaning in that body of flesh. The supreme being, the creator, dwells bodily. So these Gnostics that make these, corrupted Greek manuscripts that unfortunately certain translations like to use, that will cause problems. So just to show you guys, if you have an ISR Hallelujah scriptures here, it says like the son of Elohim. The Aramaic says the image of the son of Elohim. Huge difference, because you could even interpret it that it's talking about the exact essence or the exact representation of the son of Elohim. So meaning that it is Yahusha. He's calling Melchizedek Yahusha, essentially. His priesthood remains for eternity. Okay, again, eternity. No mortal would have a eternal priesthood. Again, but see how much greater is this one than the man Abraham. Again, you can't have a mortal being higher than another mortal. He's talking about this one is much greater than Abraham. Now think about, what did Yahusha say about himself compared to Abraham, right? Or to Solomon? A much greater than Solomon is here, referring to himself, right? Well, that Paul is using similar terminology.
Yes.
Okay. He's doing that on purpose. Okay. All right. So see, a much greater, not just greater, much greater than Abraham, the chief of the fathers or ancestors, to whom he gave the tithe of the best. For those of the sons of Levi who received the priesthood have not a no. They have received priesthood and commandment of the written law to take a tenth part from those people of their brothers, as also they had come forth from the loins of Abraham. But this man who is not written in their genealogies received the tithe from Abraham and Baruch him who had received the promise. But without dispute, he who is lesser is Baruched by him who is greater than he. And here the children of men who die receive tithes, but there he about whom the scriptures testify that he lives. And as a man, let us say about him that by Abraham, Levi, who receives tithes, was caused to tithe, for he was yet in the loins of his father when he met Melchizedek. If perfection, therefore, is by priesthood of Levi, for by it the written law was established to the people, why was another priest needed to arise in the image of Melchizedek? But does it say that he would be in the image of Aaron? But just as there was a change in priesthood in this way, there was also a change in the law. My dad used to always tell me this. Every word in a verse means something. It doesn't say the law of itself was taken away with or changed or thrown away. It says there was a change in the law, in the Torah. So in means inside of it, right? So inside the Torah, what is it talking about? It's talking about priesthood, context. Priesthood was changed. So some of the law was changed. If you think about it, right? We do animal sacrifices today? No. Why? We're in a Melchizedek priesthood. Do we ransom um do we ransom the firstborn today? Can we ransom the firstborn today? No, because we're in a Melchizedek priesthood. Can we ransom ourselves with silver like in the Levitical priesthood? You had to ransom your soul with money. No. Yahusha ransomed us forever. This is the change that Paul is talking about.
Okay, wait a minute. Are you saying that we're still in the Melchizedek priesthood?
Well, yeah, the Melchizedek priest, the heavenly Melchizedek priesthood that Yahusha
Okay,
like,
yeah.
the heavenly, the real Melchizedek priesthood. Because when Yahusha was Melchizedek, technically there was no heavenly Melchizedek priesthood at that point. It was more of a foreshadowing in Genesis 14.
So when he was the Melchizedek priesthood, when he met with Abraham, and then when they started to incorporate the Levites, is that when he gave it up and then he brought it back?
Well, I think what happened was the heavenly Melchizedek priesthood. I don't think we have evidence of it being in like really operating until Yahusha died and resurrected, and the temple being destroyed in 70 AD. I think was the first time we actually had being in the Melchizedek priesthood, because by default they could not be in that priesthood anymore. They had the temple destroyed. They were scattered from the land. All the Israelites were scattered.
No, what I was referring to is the Melchizedek priesthood when he met with Abraham, and then the priesthood of the Levites began. And then when he came back, well, not when he came back, but when he was born of the Virgin, and before his death, are you saying that the Melchizedek priesthood was established then and ended when he was crucified, and then when he comes back is going to?
No. What I was trying to say was, I don't believe there was an actual heavenly Melchizedek priesthood like yet. Like that priesthood wasn't even prophesied about until Psalms. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't believe that was in effect in the Old Testament time period. You had a human mortal priesthood before the Levitical priesthood, which was not a Melchizedek. There was like Adam, even through many traditions, people believed he was some type of priest, a mortal type of priesthood, not a Melchizedek, but a mortal type of priesthood. Like you even have Jacob offering sacrifices. You have prior to the Levitical priesthood, like the Levitical priesthood pretty much like followed whatever they had right before that.
So but in the Melchizedek, I mean, he was like an actual person that met with Abraham.
Yeah. I believe Yahusha came as Melchizedek, came to Abraham. I just don't think that, I don't see any evidence of the Bible itself saying that Melchizedek heavenly priesthood was in like running yet. Like it wasn't, Yahuwah was still working with us in a mortal priesthood. Like you have Jacob offering sacrifices like wherever Yahuwah told him to. There's still some type of human priesthood during that time in Genesis. So even though he's called Melchizedek, that heavenly priesthood, from what I could see, and this is just my opinion, I can't prove it either way. Either side of the argument can't be proven because the Bible doesn't talk about it. in Genesis, when is the first time the Melchizedek priesthood is established. The only thing we know is that from the new covenant on, that was established at that point. Like when the temple was destroyed, we know for a fact we were no longer in a Levitical priesthood from 70 AD till now. So from the time Yahusha ascended to heaven is when I think possibly between then and 70 AD, somewhere around there, you had the Melchizedek heavenly priesthood now temporarily, not permanently, but temporarily replace the Levitical priesthood, because it says in Hebrews, I don't think we got to it yet, right, Mom? 8 is where he talks about if he was on earth, he can't be a priest and all that.
I think so.
So we haven't even gotten to that point yet where Paul really explains it. Like basically, Yahusha can only be a priest in heaven. He can only be a priest in heaven. He comes down to earth. There's still priests on earth that do their job, that offer sacrifices, especially during the time of Paul writing these letters. We were not fully in a Melchizedek priesthood yet. They were still in that old priesthood. They were still in a Levitical priesthood. So Paul's saying if when Yahusha returns, he cannot be a Melchizedek priest on earth. He returns, he will. That's why I think it's different from whatever the Melchizedek thing was back then in Genesis. I think is a little different now, because now if Yahusha comes back, when he comes back, he can't be a priest the moment he returns. So the moment he returns, now the Levites will have to come back, because now he's on earth, and his authority of a priest, even though he's the creator, he's bound himself by this law that in the Melchizedek priesthood, it's only a heavenly priesthood. So the moment he comes back, the Levites have to come back. They have to. So that's the best way I could explain it. As far as the origin of it, I can't really say one way or another, because the scripture doesn't really tell us. They just say that this guy Melchizedek met Abraham with bread and wine. And Abraham gave him a tithe of all, meaning he gave Yahusha a tithe of all he had. But that's the only time we see Yahusha come as Melchizedek, or Melchizedek making an appearance in Genesis. And after that, it goes back to the way they were operating in some type of mortal priesthood with Yahuwah, where men were giving sacrifices to Yahuwah, where Yahuwah would, he would appear to them in a vision and be like, okay, Jacob, I need you to go to this mountain and make an altar of wood and offer to me sacrifices. So we see that there was some type of human priesthood from Eden to like the time period, that Melchizedek comes to Abraham. So I don't think that priesthood was really fully established even as a heavenly priesthood back then. I think it was more of Yahusha came as Melchizedek to foreshadow that priesthood that would be established, if that makes any sense. It wasn't really, from what I'm seeing in Genesis and the rest of the Torah, it really wasn't established as a heavenly priesthood back then, because you still had men acting as Yahuwah's priests, offered him sacrifice. So if it was established back then, you wouldn't be able to have men doing that. You wouldn't be able to have, Abraham being told to offer up Isaac by Yahusha. He wouldn't be requiring him to do that if you're in a heavenly priesthood. So that's where I think the distinction was back then. Back then, it was him coming as Melchizedek one time to foreshadow himself coming as the Messiah. Really is what that whole thing was about in Genesis 14, where it talks about he came with bread and wine. What does Yahusha institute at the Passover meal? Bread and wine. It was a way to foreshadow the coming Messiah, who he was. He was the coming Messiah. So that's the best way I could explain it to someone, is that even though he's Melchizedek, I don't think he was operating in a heavenly Melchizedek priesthood at that moment in time. That's the best way I could describe it. It was more of a foreshadowing come in that name, to come as the king of Salem, Jerusalem. And Yahusha prophetically is prophesied as he's going to rule the 12 tribes of Israel. He will be king of Israel. He will be king of Jerusalem. So I think all that was like prophetic. The whole purpose of him coming as Melchizedek in Genesis 14 mainly was about Baruching Abraham. Also, I think it's kind of interesting too when you think about that. That's one of the two possible situations where Yahusha in John 8, right? He says, Abraham was glad to see my day and rejoiced. Mm-hmm. So I think either Abram met him there, or he met him in Genesis 18, one or the other. He met Yahusha at either one for the first time, because he clearly Yahusha's referencing Genesis 18 or 14, where he's talking about, Abraham rejoiced to see my day and was glad when he saw it. So he was basically trying to tell the Pharisees, listen, I know your ancestor Abraham. He met me. And he's trying to let them know, like, listen, I'm not a regular mortal guy. I pre-existed. I was before Abraham.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the whole purpose there. So those that don't want to believe in Yahusha's pre-existence, they got to deal with John 8:58, clearly showing he was a pre-existent creator, celestial being, creator that pre-existed Abraham and all the patriarchs. But anyway, so let's see here where we left off at. No. 4. Now see how great this one was, to whom even the ancestor Abraham gave a tenth of the choice of possessions. Okay. And truly who's those who are of the sons of Levi who receive the priesthood have a command to receive tithes from the people according to the Torah, that is from their brothers, though they have come from the loins of Abraham. However, the one whose genealogy is not derived from them received tithes from Abraham, and Baruch the one who held the promises. And it is beyond all dispute that the lesser is Baruched by the better. But here it is, men who die that receive tithes, that there is someone of whom. No. Okay, so it says, it is die that receive tithes, but there is someone who it is witness that he lives. And one might say that through Abraham, even Levi, who received tithes, gave tithes. Okay, so who gave tithes? For he was still in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. Interesting. So, truly then, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, and I like how the ISR puts it, through the Levitical priesthood, it does not say that it does not say that the first covenant's imperfect. It says that the priesthood was imperfect. Key phrase there. Okay. For under it, the people who were given the Torah, why was there still need for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek and not be called according to the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed of being changed of necessity, there takes place a change of law also. For he of whom it was said belongs to another tribe in which no one had attended at the slaughter place. For it is perfectly clear that our master arose from Yehuda, meaning Yahusha, a tribe about which Masha never spoke of concerning priesthood. And this is clear still, if another priest. Is still, if another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become not according to the Torah of flesh command, but according to the power of eternal life. For he does witness, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. This is the verse I was talking about, guys. Paul is quoting from Psalms 110, verse 4. For there is indeed a setting aside of former command because of its weakness and unprofitableness. For the law perfected not, but the bringing in of a better expectation through which we draw near to Elohim. And it was not without an oath, for they indeed became priests without an oath, but he became a priest with an oath by him who said to him, Yahuwah has sworn.
But
And
bro,
shall not
he said a priest forever.
Yeah,
Like-
so yeah, for they indeed became priests without an oath, but he, meaning Messiah, with an oath by him, Yahuwah the Father, who said to him, Yahuwah has sworn and shall not regret, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So basically, Paul is like saying what I've been saying. It was a foreshadowing through David that Yahusha would be a eternal Melchizedek priest. Now, people might be asking, okay, so how does this work if the Levitical priesthood is coming back in the millennium? Well, you have to understand the Melchizedek priesthood can only operate in heaven. Okay, it's a heavenly priesthood. So, and he's going to get into that in the next chapter, in chapter 8. He's going to get into that once Messiah comes back here on earth, mind you, the millennial is a earthly kingdom. This is something that's not taught in Christianity. Okay, the millennial is a temporary 1,000-year earthly kingdom that precedes the new heaven and earth. So this is not taught in Christianity. Christianity usually tries to teach that, you're already at the new heaven and new earth, which makes zero sense because Satan still needs to be destroyed. Mm-hmm. The beast was killed and the false prophet was killed before the millennium, but you still have Satan and the majority of the inhabitants of the earth that are in the millennium that will be grafted in during the millennium. They're going to turn on Yahusha once Satan is leased out of the pit after 1,000 years. So you're still going to have sin. So for you to be in the new heaven, new earth, there can't be sin. So again, there's a lot of issues with the way the church tries to combine the millennial with what's what's called the actual kingdom of heaven, the golden city, and all that. So a lot of people get confused. There's actually two kingdoms that are coming. You have the millennial kingdom, which is actually Yahusha basically defeats the beast and the last beast kingdom. And that kingdom, it's said in Daniel, what is it, 7, Mom?
I think so.
Daniel 7 says that specific kingdom is given to Yahuwah, to Yahusha, and his set apart ones. So the millennial kingdom is actually like a takeover, basically. It's like Yahusha coming back. Oh, go ahead.
The sad part about this is that the people that believe that they're going to be raptured up, they're thinking that rapturing that they're going to be experiencing is forever, that they're going to be with like forever. They're not thinking about the 1,000 years. They're thinking about, okay, once we get raptured up, that's it.
That's it, right?
Yeah, because people take like you said, they take that verse out of context, even that phrase out of context. It says, right, we will be with the master forever. It doesn't say that we're in heaven. It says that we're with him, like beside him. We're with him forever. And that's true. They're going to be with him for the 1,000-year reign, and then they'll be with him for the new heaven, new earth after the white throne judgment. But that doesn't mean you're in heaven forever. So what they're doing is what my dad would call what happens when you assume. And, that old saying, what happens when you assume. So that you got to be careful when you look at words like that, like what Sister Marissa is talking about, is be careful with terminology like that. What that saying is that we're going to be with Yahusha forever. Not that we're with him in heaven for forever. We're with him forever from that point, meaning from the 1,000-year reign to the eternal kingdom. That whole time we're with him forever, and forever and ever after the new heaven, new earth. Not that instantaneously that starts the kingdom of heaven. I think that's where people are getting confused. That's not saying that. So that's a lot of presumption and assumption. Anyway, verse 22, but as much as Yahusha has became, stupid notifications tonight, has become a guarantor of a better covenant. I would highlight that, better covenant, meaning the new covenant is superior. And indeed, those that became priests were many because they were prevented by death from continuing, but because he remains forever, has an unchangeable priesthood. Therefore, he also is able to save completely those who draw near to Alua through him. I don't even like the word through. I would say by him. I don't like the word through because then he becomes more of a tool rather than the creator. And yeah, it's just certain terminology I have a pet peeve about. Okay, by him everyone will be saved. Every ever living to make intercession for them. For it was fitting that we should have such a high priest, kind, innocent, undefiled. Having been separated from the sinners and exalted above the heavens, who does not need, as those high priests, to offer up slaughter offerings by day first for his own sins, and then for those. No. For those of the people, for this he did once for all when he offered up himself. For the Torah points as high priest men who have weakness, but the word of the oath, which came after the Torah, points the Son, having been perfected forever. So the whole point is you got a better covenant, better priest, because it's eternal. There's no faults. Okay, in the priesthood, the biggest problem was, right, you had mortal men being the priests.
Mhm.
So anyway, so just to kind of get a whole context on that. So let me see here. Let's see here. Trying to think if there's anything else to expound upon. I mean, it's pretty much self-explanatory. We're going to get into him explaining this more in chapter 8 and then chapter 9. So 8's going to deal with, again, how the new covenant works with this and all that. So, Mom, would you like to do chapter 8?
Sure. Okay. The priest of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by Yahuwah, not by man. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, and so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already men who offer the gifts prescribed by the law. They serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moshe was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. But the ministry Yahusha has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one, and it is founded on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But Yahuwah found fault with the people and said, the time is coming, declares Yahuwah, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Yashrael and with the house of Yehuda. It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares Yahuwah. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Yashrael After that time, declares Yahuwah, I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their Elua, and they will be my people. No longer will a man teach his neighbor, or a man his brother, saying, Know Yahuwah, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear.
All right. So, anything you thought to bring up from chapter 8? And I'm like, my mouth is dry.
Yeah. No, just some incredible, promises that he's Paul is bringing out from Jeremiah, how he says, I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. Beautiful, beautiful words that we see from that prophet. Basically he's saying if they're, if the first covenant was perfect, and I think this is where some of these Torah haters get their little paws in here, because what we have to understand, and we all understand it, I'm saying that, but what people who are looking at this need to understand is that the Torah has its righteous place. Its place is to help us to be obedient and to be favorable in his eyes. It never could save us, but it could make us more righteous and approved by the Father. It gives us our guidelines for living. I mean, otherwise, how do we know even what sin is? We don't know what sin is except for knowing what the law says, that transgression from the law is sin. That's what people in, I'm sorry to say, people in the church and stuff, if you ask them to define sin, they probably wouldn't even know how to, because they don't understand about the law. But I think Paul really explains it perfectly, that it's there for a purpose, but if it was perfect, there would be no need for another covenant.
Yeah. He's talking about the covenant. He's also talking about how the priesthood had flaws. Right. If people would read in context, okay. He's talking about even the weakness that the mediator of the first was flawed, because it was a mortal man, Aaron being the mediator. Okay, even before him, Moses, a flawed mediator. Enoch, flawed mediator. All flawed. They're all mortal men. They all have sin in them. They're not a perfect mediator. That's part of what this is talking about in chapter 8 in context. Okay. For every high priest. Now, what's interesting, a lot of people, there's this doctrine that I think is still going around, if I'm not mistaken, where people think that, we're the new temple and there's never going to be a temple again in Jerusalem, and that we're the true temple. You might want to read verse 2 right here. He's talking about there's a temple in heaven that's the true temple, okay? He is the minister of the set-apart place in the true tabernacle, which Allah set up and not man. And he's not talking about the human body, by the way. He's talking about there's a temple in heaven. There's a temple in heaven. Yahuwah has a temple in heaven. The golden city, the New Jerusalem, it's up there in heaven. It's not the human body. So I know a lot of people get deceived by that nonsense, because they look at Paul's isolated letters where he says you are a dwelling place for the set apart spirit, and get confused with what a allegory is and try to make it literal and try to say, you're the new temple. That's not what he was saying. Okay. So, let's see here. And this is what I was talking about, says verse 4. If he were on earth, he could not be a priest, or he would not be a priest, because there have been priests who have been offering gifts according to what is in the law. So meaning the moment Yahushua returns, you have to have a Levitical priesthood. Those who serve the form and the shadow of these things that are in heaven, as if it was said to Moshe when he made the tabernacle, see and do everything by the image that appeared to you on the mountain. The image that appeared to him, by the way, is heaven. Okay, he saw Yahuwah's temple in heaven, and in that cloud. Now Yahushua Messiah has received the ministry which is better than that, as the media. Now, so he talks about that the ministry that is that much better of a covenant, he is a better mediator of a better covenant with better promises. For the first one now this is where they get confused, like you said in verse 7. But what does verse 6 talk about? It's talking about a mediator. It's talking about a priesthood. Okay, so if the first one, I would say that the first one is not even talking about the covenant, it's talking about the priesthood. If the first one had been with fault, there would not have need no place for this second one. You know why? And actually, let me correct myself. It is talking about the covenant, but it's talking about the people of the covenant. Verse 8. For he found fault with who? The covenant? No. With them. Who's them? Israel. Okay? And he said, Behold, the days are coming, says Yahuwah, and I will make a new covenant for the house of Israel, and with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like that covenant I gave to their fathers in the day when I took their hands and brought them forth out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue my covenant. I also rejected them, says Yahuwah. But this is the covenant I shall give to the house of Israel. And after those days, says Yahuwah, I will put my law in their minds and in their hearts. And I shall be to them a Elohim, they shall be to me a people. And a man will not teach each citizen of his city, neither his brother, and say, Know Yahuwah, because they shall all know me, from their little ones until their elders. The least to the greatest. And I shall purge them of their evils, and I shall not remember their sins again. In that he said, new, he has made the first old, which is outward, old, which is passing away. So, meaning in Paul's time, the Levitical priesthood was still there. It was passing, the first covenant was passing away. It was slowly passing away in his time, meaning that we are fully in a new covenant now. The only difference, the only promise Yahuwah is that he will fulfill, he hasn't fulfilled yet. That he didn't fulfill is that he is going to cause us to walk in his ways fully. Now, obviously, with indwelling flesh, that can't be fulfilled yet. That is why I believe we need a new body. Why there needs to be a resurrection for us to fully be able to follow his laws without fault. For him to cause us, him to make us follow his laws, where there's no more obstinate flesh, you would need a resurrected body physically. So that is possibly one of the reasons that we need a resurrection. So I believe that still hasn't been fully fulfilled yet, where it says, I will cause them to obey my laws. And verse 11 too. No one will need to teach one another, they shall all know me. I don't care how skilled you think you are in the scriptures, how much you think you obey Yahuwah out of your heart. None of us are perfect right now. We don't all really know him. We are getting to know him right now in our prayer life, in our daily readings, so on and so forth. But no one can claim that they're part of verse 11 right now. No one can claim that. I don't care how seasoned you think you are in the word. No man will need to teach each citizen, neither his brother, and say, know Yahuwah. No one fully 110% knows Yahuwah and knows every part of his character. What I believe this in verse 11 is talking about is the millennium. It's talking about that you won't need to teach one another because you're going to see me as I am, right? You're going to know me intimately. You're going to know me. I'm going to tell you all my dislikes, all the things I like. Even though we have his word as a guide, we don't have him in front of us face to face. We don't have what the original Israelites had in the wilderness. We don't have that. We don't have his esteem, his splendor in the tabernacle. We don't have that. We're in a administration of favor right now where we only have really a spiritual connection with him. We don't have a physical, intimate, him, standing in front of us like he did with the disciples, him sitting on the Mount of Olives and them actually communing with him physically. We don't have that right now. We're going to have that in the millennium. He is going to be our king. He's going to sit on the throne. So verse 11 is not fulfilled. I don't care what people are trying to say with that, well, I know him. Let's not deceive ourselves here, okay? We all are trying to get to know his character day by day, but we don't fully know him like verse 11 is talked about in context, okay? So, and people that say that don't understand what that verse is actually talking about. It's talking about you fully know him. You don't need anyone to correct you on doctrine. That has yet to happen yet. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. So, and I shall purge them of their sins and not remember their sins again. Now, this is not taught in the church. It's saying that he's going to purge, that we're still going to have sins that need purging. See, people think, well, he did the work on the cross, so there's no sins that need to be forgiven, right? So they think automatically because he died once for our past sins that we're not going to need to have our sins purged when he returns. He's still going to need to purge our sins and purge them away. Now,
it says, I will.
Yeah, it says right here, and mind you, Paul is quoting this in a new covenant context, meaning second coming context. So meaning that it still has to happen. He hasn't fully purged all of our, present and future sins. He still has to purge that because from day to day, you're going to fall short of the mark. Yeah. There's going to be sins of ours that still need to be purged by the time he returns. So a lot of people have the wrong idea about the cross. Like the cross is like, it's gonna, that him dying on the cross, like purged all of your sins all at once. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Yeah. What the cross did was it purged your sins that you did beforehand, before coming into covenant, when you were in the world. It purged all of your previous sins. And don't get me wrong, his blood covers your sins. But just because it covers your sins does not mean that you're not going to have future sins that need to be purged when he returns. So I think that's where that whole Christian understanding comes in, and where people, and it almost gives them like what they call fire insurance.
Yeah.
And they twist that into the idea because he died on the stake that I can keep on sinning because it's already covered. Very dangerous, in my opinion. Okay. Let me see here. I noticed Brother Dennis got on his own device here. Brother Dennis, I think you're unmuted here. Would you like to finish us off in chapter 9?
Oh, let me see. Yeah, I was in her room, and decided to come in here because I had to lay down for a while. Now what?
Okay.
Yeah, I forgot where my place was. Where was that?
Hebrews chapter 9.
Hebrews 9. Okay. Hebrews chapter 9. Okay, can you hear me all right?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay. Now the first covenant indeed had regulations of worship and the earthly set-apart place. For a tent was prepared, the first part, in which was the lampshade, and the table and the showbread, which is called the set-apart place. And after the second veil, the part of the tent which is called most set-apart, to which belonged to the golden censer, and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that held the manna, and the rod of Aharon that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And above it the cherubim of the steam were overshadowing the place of atonement, about which we do not now speak in detail. And these having been prepared like this, the priest always went into the first part of the tent, accomplishing the services. But into the second part, the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for sins of ignorance of the people. The set-apart spirit signifying this, that the way into the most set-apart place was not yet made manifest while the first tent was standing, but which was a parable for the present time in which both gifts and slaughters are offered, which are unable to perfect the one serving as to his conscience. Only as to foods and drinks, and differing washings, and fleshly regulations, supposed until a time of setting matters straight. But Mashiach, having become a high priest of the coming to matters through the greater and more perfect tent not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, entered into the most set-apart place once for all, not with the blood of goats and cows, but with his own blood, having obtained everlasting redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and ashes of a heifer, sprinkling and defiled, sets apart for a cleansing of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of the Mashiach, who through the everlasting Spirit offered himself unblemished to Elohim, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living Elohim. And because of this, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that death having taken place for redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant, those who are called might receive the promise of the everlasting inheritance. For where a covenant is, it is necessary for the death of the covenanted one to be established. For a covenant over those dead is firm, since it is never valid while the covenanted one is living. Therefore, not even the first covenant was instituted without blood. For when, according to Torah, every command had been spoken by Moshe to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which Elohim commanded you." And in the same way he sprinkled with blood both the tent and all the vessels of the service. And according to the Torah, almost all is cleansed with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. It was necessary then that the copies of the heavenly ones should be cleansed with these, but the heavenly ones themselves with better slaughter offerings than these. For Mashiach has not entered into a set-apart place made by hand, figures of the true, but into the heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of Elohim in our behalf. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters into the set-apart place year by year with blood not his own. For if so, he would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the offering of himself. And as it awaits men to die once, and after this the judgment, so also the Mashiach, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time apart from sin to those waiting for him unto deliverance. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I really recommend those that are unfamiliar with the Levitical priesthood and all the articles that are being described in this chapter, read Exodus 25, read a lot of the chapters. I think it's from like Exodus 25 to like 30 or 34 describe all of what Paul's talking about here. So he's like a Torah scholar trying to compress all of that into one chapter. So I really recommend if you're not aware of the table of showbread, the incense altar, the what do you got? You got the multiple altars, multiple well, yeah, the courtyard, but you got the table of incense, you got the showbread table, you got
The bronze
bronze altar thing, sis. Yeah, there's so many articles in there. I really recommend, Mom. Where's that rose book we have? Where is it?
Oh, I don't know.
There's a book I want to show you guys. I recommend, obviously not on Sabbath. I would definitely encourage you guys.
Yeah, it's wonderful because it shows pictures of everything. I'll tell you one thing that's neat is if you go on your phone and you just type, Aaron's vestments or not vestments, his clothing, his robes, his temple garments. They'll actually show you. It's really quite interesting. With all 12 gems on the ephod, and it's really something. And they show you pictures of the tabernacle and Solomon's temple too.
Here we go. I shared this link, I think, with Sadia and Josie a couple of years ago.
So this is
It was
a
either
wonderful
last
book.
year or 2 years ago. I showed this to our group. So it's called the Rose Book Bible Charts and Timelines. So
We got it at Walmart.
Walmart had this for like
Wasn't expensive,
clearance.
$25, I think.
I think it was less. It was like 15 at the time.
Oh, maybe.
It was right before COVID, so it was pretty cheap.
It has got more maps and charts.
Let me just show everyone what we're talking about.
Timelines.
There's a they give you pictures of what the tabernacle would look like. Let me see here. So just to give you guys
Noah's Ark.
a little bit of a visual here.
Yeah.
This is what Paul is really trying to, in essence, trying to compile within one chapter. He's trying to compile all of that into one chapter. So he's talking about the showbread. He's talking about this. He's talking about that with the Levitical priesthood. Let me see if I can. There's individual articles as well. See, this is what I was talking about. The altar for the burnt offerings.
Right.
So you got multiple altars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
See?
Somebody that doesn't know the law, this book would be phenomenal.
The funny thing, this was a Christian book.
Yeah.
Ark of the Covenant even shows you what this looks like with it being a copy of what's in heaven. Basically, that the real one in heaven, guys, has real cherubs overlaying Yahuwah's basically
Mhm.
his. There would be an ark in heaven where you have the cherubs covering right before Yahuwah's throne, and so Yahuwah obviously is always described in Scripture, which I have to blame. I can't really blame the church for it. I blame the translators for it. They mistranslate as between the cherubim.
Mhm.
It should actually be saying above the cherubim. So you have these cherubs on this altar thing, or this Ark of the Covenant, like, which is kind of like a mercy seat basically.
Yeah.
And you have Yahusha sitting on the throne above that. So to give you kind of a visual. And obviously you would have the rainbow in heaven with the northern lights around it and all that. So that's really what it looks like in heaven. But there's a lot of good stuff in this. Like I said, it's very good for really going into what Paul's talking about here, the tabernacle and all that. So he talks about the Ark of the Covenant in this chapter. He talks about the tables, the two tablets of stone that the Ten Commandments were written on. The Ten Commandments were put in the Ark, which, by the way, also the book of the entire Torah was put, contrary to popular belief, into the same Ark of the Covenant, meaning that the book of the law is not separate from the Ten Commandments. And I know a lot of false teachers out there want to teach you that, well, we only have to obey the Ten Commandments. We don't have to obey anything outside of that. We don't obey the book of the law. The book of the law was only for Israel, yada, yada, yada. That's what usually the Christians will try to say. And some false teachers in this movement say that as well. So when you really go into that, you can see that it was one law. Okay. Let's see here. It talks about where the sacrifices were offered, food and drink. Now, where's? Oh, go ahead, sis.
Before you get ready completely to pass out and take step on her, and she'll need to come back in for the kitten.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna close soon on this study. I just wanted to explain verse 10 because this gets kind of confusing with people. They look at this as it's that it's supposedly negatively talking about the Levitical priesthood, supposedly, except in food and drink only in the various Washingtons, which are ordinances of the flesh that are established until the time of Reformation. I'm not really a big fan of the term Reformation there because then that gets attributed to the Protestant Reformation and all that, and then they can kind of try to make this false narrative that the Protestant Reformation ended that. I would disagree. I believe the time of Reformation, it could be referring to a certain administration or certain endpoint. Obviously, ceremonial washings, there is none in a Melchizedek priesthood. For the most part, when you're talking about ceremonial washings that include sacrifices, you can't do that in a Melchizedek priesthood. So what Paul is probably talking about is the change of priesthood. Some of these things were put to a temporary end until the millennium. So that's what I believe verse 10 is actually talking about, that because of the change of priesthood, that these commands about washing, like ceremonial washings, sacrificial commands have been put temporarily to the side. But the Messiah who has come has become the high priest of the two things that he did. He entered the great and perfect tabernacle again, heaven, the temple in heaven, which is not made with hands and was not from these things. So talks about he did not enter with the blood of the yearling goats and calves, but with his own blood. Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Talks about the heifer. So it's talking about the sprinkling of the heifer in verse 13. Again, I would suggest go to the book of Numbers and other places if you want to know about the sprinkling of the red heifer and what that's actually talking about. It's a ceremonial purifying ordinance So again, that's what verse 11 in context is talking about. Purify. Now, so it's basically saying that now the Messiah, by his eternal spirit, offered himself once without blemish to purify our conscience from dead works that we may serve the living Alua. But because of this, he is the mediator of the new covenant, for in his death, he is salvation to those who violated the first covenant, that we, those who were called, the eternal inheritance, would receive the promise. See what I'm saying? He died for our previous sins, not so that we can keep on sinning, and his blood's going to keep covering us. So you see that in verse 15, it says he died for those that sinned in the first covenant. For there is a covenant, it needs to be a death of him who made it. But is only valid concerning now a lot of people are going to breeze cross verse 16 there. Do you know why that's important? It says the one who made it must die. Think about it. Who made the first covenant with Israel at Sinai? Yahuwah, right? It's saying there must be a death of him who made the first covenant. So this goes back to the divorce and remarriage. Okay. Yahuwah himself had to die for us. If he's not Yahusha, then you have a huge problem and you have no remarriage.
Okay, wait a minute. I thought the first covenant was with him and Adam.
Well, what Paul is referring to the Mosaic covenant, like in terminology wise, when it's always talking about the first covenant, it's always talking about the law of Moses. Like to explain this, the law that was in the garden, we're not going to be judged by on the great white throne judgment. The law of Moses wasn't in the garden. The law of Moses came at Sinai. So what the authors of the New Testament, when Paul and all of them say the first covenant, they're talking about the Mosaic covenant. They're talking about the law at Sinai. So Yahuwah married Israel, right? At Sinai, that was the first covenant. And
I thought the first covenant was between him and Adam.
Well, there is a covenant, but what I'm trying to say is when it talks about the first covenant in Paul's context that he's using, he's not referring to the Adamic covenant. He's referring to the first time Yahuwah married Israel, because what Paul is using here is like the context that the one who did that covenant must have died to make a new covenant. And, since Yahuwah is Yahusha, he died for our sins. He died to nullify the first covenant. And now the new covenant is the second covenant. And so that's what Paul's trying to do here. But technically, you're right that there's been other covenants in Israel's history. Mm-hmm. But as far as the nickname first covenant, it always refers to the Mosaic covenant. It always refers to the law at Sinai. Throughout the whole New Testament, that's how they use that term. They're always talking about the law of Moses as the first covenant. And that's what we're going to be judged by. We're not going to be judged by what's in Eden. That's why people get kind of confused. I know there's a lot of teachings going around that the law of Moses was the same law as the garden. It isn't. There's many things in the law of Moses that was not commanded to Adam. Like don't marry your cousin.
Right. Right.
That was not given to Adam. Don't marry your sister. That wasn't given to Adam. I could go through the whole list. It's a whole different covenant. So there's and that kind of gets like iffy with some of the literature out there, like Jubilees, that wants to claim that the law of Moses went all the way to Adam. It didn't. Yahuwah did not give the law of Moses to the patriarchs. He gave it to Moses, and Moses gave it to the people. And that was the first time he gave that specific law. He gave commandments in the garden, not the same type of commandments. He gave simpler commandments. There were less commandments in the law he gave in the garden. Like the first ever law, don't eat the fruit, right? That's the first ever commandment. Then as sin increases, Yahuwah gives more commandments. As Cain and Abel happened, now he has to tell Noah and them, don't kill your brother. Don't hate your fellow Israelite. Don't kill your brother. Yeah. Don't murder him. So, but technically the law he's giving from Adam to Noah and prior to Moses is not the same law at Sinai. It's a different covenant. So usually when scripture says the first covenant, it's always talking about the Mosaic covenant. And you'll see that later in the book of Hebrews. Didn't even talk about blood here. He's talking about the sprinkling of blood that Moses did. Moses had to sprinkle blood on the tablets of stone, if I'm not mistaken, right? He sprinkled blood on them. So that's what Paul in context here is talking about.
And in the very beginning, if you think about it, Cain had to marry his sister.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why I was saying, like, we can't lie to ourselves and say the law of Moses was in the garden. It clearly wasn't. There were certain similar commands, don't get me wrong, that Yahuwah gave to Adam that are inside the law of Moses, but not everything in the law of Moses was given in the garden. It's not the same law, because I see a lot of people using that to try to convince Christians, and it's not right to do that, because that's like a gray lie there. That's like a white lie there, because you're telling them that Abraham had the same commands as Moses. He didn't.
No.
It's not right for us to do it, because we're sinning at that point. We're telling someone a lie. We shouldn't be doing that. So we need to understand that through different covenants, Yahuwah had different commands as well. But just to answer Marissa's question, when it's talking about the first covenant, it's always talking about the Mosaic covenant. It's in the New Testament, it's always talking about the Mosaic covenant, because that's what they were under before the new covenant. They were not under. I mean, you could say that circumcision, yes, was carried over. I get it. But the covenant that they were under before the New Testament time period was the Mosaic covenant, the whole Tanakh time period, from Exodus 20 to Malachi. That is a Mosaic covenant the whole time. So when Paul is like expounding here, he's talking about, I know it's confusing because, like Marissa pointed out, it's true. The first ever technical covenant was the Adamic covenant, technically. But again, it's not what Paul's referencing here. The Adamic covenant was not sprinkled with blood. So there is difference in context. So that's why I would say it has to be the Mosaic covenant he's talking about. He's talking about the sprinkling on the tables of stone. He's talking about, see here, the new covenant. There's a covenant. There must be the death of him who made it. Now, again, like I said, verse 16. If there was a oneness verse to look at, it's right there. The death of him who made it. So meaning that to even make a new covenant, the Father had to die for us. To even make a new covenant. And that's very clear. You'll see in Jeremiah 3 or 4, where it talks about the divorce. It's even hinted at the death. The only way the original wife can return to the land is the first husband, not a new husband. The first husband must die. And there's no way around that. And Paul even talks about that in Romans 7. There's no way around that. The only way Israel could come back. And he even says the angels were wondering, does he know what he just said? You can kind of see the picture in heaven. Michael is like being pushed by Gabriel, like, yeah, you ask him how he's going to do that. You go ahead and ask him how he's going to do that. How he's going to take her back when he said he couldn't take her back. Yahuwah always had this in mind, that he was going to have to die for Israel, his bride. He always knew this, and he had it preordained even, so that when Israel screwed up, had to divorce the house of Israel, even though Judah was never technically divorced, he still had to make a new marriage covenant, the new covenant. And he knew how he was going to do it. He was going to come as a human, as his son, Yahusha, and die for us. And that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. So to understand the remarriage in the new covenant of Israel coming back, and the what you call the two-house restoration of Israel, the only way to fully understand it is to understand the oneness. There's no other way. There's no other way. If you don't receive the oneness, you're going to have a big problem with explaining the Basora to someone, especially to a Jewish person. Especially, they're going to be like, what the heck are you talking about? A new person can't die for his people. What are you talking about? So, any Jewish person that knows the Torah and Tanakh, they're going to look at you like you got a Mike Tyson tattoo on your face. You're going to say, oh, well, his son, who's a separate entity, is going to redeem the bride. They're going to be like, that can't work according to Torah and the Tanakh. So it is important,
Mhm.
and I want to make it clear. I'm not saying that I'm rejecting Yahusha. I don't want people getting confused what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Yahusha is Yahuwah, same person. The only way Yahusha can be the Messiah and fulfill Jeremiah 3 and all those other places, he has to be the original husband. He has to be the original husband. And if you want even more proof, the original Hebrew scribes during the time period that the Targums were written understood they understood the word of Yahuwah was the original husband. They didn't know who the word of Yahuwah would become, who he would be later on when he takes on flesh. They didn't realize that. But they did know that this word of Yahuwah person who was with the Father from the beginning, who was the Father, would come down and basically he would be the same husband that married Israel at Sinai.
Mhm.
And that's the whole concept there. So anyway. So hopefully this was edifying to you guys. Hopefully this helped you guys out with certain things. Any questions, again, always, I encourage you guys reach out to this ministry. Like I said, I leave out all my contact information on the description of this YouTube page. Feel free to private message me on any of those social media. Anyway, so hopefully you guys are having a good Sabbath out there tonight, all of our brothers and sisters. And I like I said before, I hope you guys really felt edified by this study. Again, also those that are interested, what I was reading from when I kept like switching back from versions, this is called the Original Aramaic New Testament in Plain English by a reverend named David Boucher. Okay. He's a Christian reverend that translates the Peshitta New Testament into English, and it's plain English, so it's very easy to read. So I was comparing this while we were reading, and everyone was reading. I was comparing the two, the ISR, which is based on a Greek New Testament, with this. So, like I said, there are certain things that are different. Like you'll compare the Greek to the Aramaic. So I would encourage people that are being led to do that. Definitely do that. Start testing things out. Look at different manuscripts. Look at different versions. I really, if I had a Bible, I would say Aramaic New Testament, Peshitta New Testament, and Septuagint Old Testament would be my Bible, personally. But anyway, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this study. Thank you for staying with us for so long. And to all of our brothers and sisters in Yahuwah Almighty and Yahushua Messiah, have a great night. Shabbat Shalom. And see you next time.